Hello and welcome to the swim brief. As I just said, we'll do it live. And nobody under the age of 40, well, I guess I'm 39, but nobody younger than me understands that
You're
reference.
you're 39, but you read it at a 40-year-old level, and I think that's why you're able to understand your own references like that.
Yeah. I think I think that it's probably good because that's a Bill O'Reilly clip from when he was, I think, on like Entertainment Tonight or something. And if
Huh.
people don't recognize it, it means they have no idea who Bill O'Reilly is. And I think that's a great thing.
Okay,
So
probably, yeah.
um, Joel, of course, is on here with me. We have no Eric this week. He's very busy testing out some advanced products. Actually, I forget why he's not here, so I just always make
Top
something up on the
secret
spot.
Speedo business, top secret,
Top secret
super secret,
Speedo business.
super secret stuff.
And I am trying to do a better job promoting off the top. So anybody listening to this, um, yesterday I launched a brand new Instagram account for Chris DeSantis Coaching. So if you want more content that is going to be a lot more positive psychology focused than this podcast, although the one we're about to record is quite positive psychology focused. So it's a good theme to go hand in hand. But if you want Instagram content that is focused around the work that I do with Chris DeSantis Coaching, and 20% of it being my sense of humor as well, or whatever you might consider,
Or lack
or
thereof.
lack
Yeah.
thereof, right? It's Chris D underscore coach on Instagram. So Chris D, all one, and then an underscore and coach. And it launched yesterday. Really happy so far. The amount of people that are following it, and I've got plenty of content just sort of waiting to go up there. And so I'm looking forward to seeing you guys there, coming, interacting around some of that stuff. And then you know, come back here and listen to episodes of the Swim Brief, including ones like this one, where actually we're going to kind of turn the tables because, as I see it, Joel, you're actually going to be the host
Yeah.
today.
Yep. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
well, first, congrats on setting this up. I know it's a
yeah.
arduous process, but that's good. I think it's really going to turn out well. I'm really
Yeah.
excited for you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I am in the process of doing more work with Chris DeSantis Coaching, and I've spent the past couple of years when I've been pretty low key with that stuff, thinking about what could I do better the next time around. And one of those things was give give a modicum of effort into your social media. And so I didn't just go like, you know, like we're about to talk about, I think later, just go and beat myself up and say, try harder. Damn
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I did actually spend a bunch of time learning what to do and how.
Awesome. You got your audio going there?
Yeah, I think
All right.
I by mistake fidgeted with my AirPods in the background, and therefore they decided to take over for a
It's the
second.
East Coast hand gestures. You throw those in there. It scares us Midwesterners and throws the audio off. There you go.
So I put the
Yes,
AirPods away. That's good. You go
good
ahead.
call. Yeah, so you and I talked a little bit, texting, and I was thinking about like when I coached club, I would have kids from 6 years old up to 18, and I'd start to always think, from a physiological perspective, what are they going to need down the road, and when they're 13, 14, when they're 15, 16, when they're in college. And then you start to think about, okay, what are they going to do technique wise? What's appropriate at this level, this way. But I think this is what I started to backtrack on. And I wanted to ask you about. I think we always just kind of do, we always kind of tick the box of we're doing goal setting. We got short
Right.
term, we got long term. So technique, I've got an idea what I want them to do at each age, physiologically each age. But then with goal setting and things like that, it's just like one size kind of fits all. And then I started coaching college, and you start to see kids at the back end of their careers. And sometimes we see these articles like about Caleb Dressel, and I'm not saying we have to something went wrong or something was bad with his training. I mean, it happens, and that's why I think the phrase retro design is kind of a bad one to go with. I think I heard just the other day this phrase called backcasting. We have forecasting, but like backcasting, and thinking what are some variables that we can maybe lay down in their past to try to help them as they go through these progressions, as they get to their older stage where, the time drops aren't coming, and they just kind of are that, like you said, I'll just grind a little bit harder. And I think sometimes you get these diminishing returns that might frustrate and push kids out of the sport, before they really are ready to leave the sport, I guess. I don't know a better way to phrase that back part there, but I just kind of wonder, in your eyes, what would be a way we could kind of backcast some of the things we need for resilience as they get through each step of the way, I guess.
Yeah. So, and I was so excited that you asked this question when you wrote it, because I mean, one of the things that I always struggle to do is um, to get some of what I know and sort of what I'm working with in terms of positive psychology into the various formats. So that is something actually I'm working with. And this is a question that I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about. I probably, some variation of what you just asked, I've been thinking about it for 15 years. Ever since I came across some of this positive psychology theory, and the pieces of it that resonated with me, but that hadn't, that they were very abstract from what I was doing as a coach, or even what I did as an athlete. Not somebody, I was talking about this past weekend, who kept competing until I was 34, and I think I'll probably compete again. So I've got some stuff, that is a coaching piece of it. I've got some stuff that's personal, right? Like it takes, if I give myself some credit, a certain amount of resiliency to continue to want to compete well past, college or any kind of level where literally anybody is expecting you to do anything, right? And so I think there's so many directions we could take this in. The first one, and the most important one to me, is I think there is a fundamental flaw in most models of how swimmers and athletes, I think in general, or people in general, learn to motivate themselves to do things, right? And because of this sort of developmental flaw in motivational structure, athletes end up motivating themselves in a way that is very effective in the short term, that is almost always effective in the short term, but over the long term, it can actually, it sort of poisons their motivation, so that if they keep grinding, if they keep going back to the well, to use another analogy, over time, they will learn to really dislike what they're doing. And I think we see this all the time, right, with people who are super, super committed to the sport, and then they reach a point, and I think Caleb Dressel communicated this quite effectively, that like, here's somebody who has dedicated so much to it and has gotten a lot of enjoyment out of the sport of swimming, but somehow things have gotten to a stage where he was actively disliking the thing that he was so passionate about, right? And so I see like a massive opportunity, if we can sort of rebuild cultures around motivation and teach about motivation at a developmentally appropriate stage. And I'm just staying pretty vague about this, because I want to see what kind of questions you might have based on what I just said, and we'll sort of go down one of those paths.
Well, I was just thinking, like with Caleb Dressel example, kind of taking it back to like my level of coaching, which is obviously a billionth level below that.
Don't be so modest, Joel.
So thank you. But so I had a woman in New York really well too, that swam on the team, and she was capable of doing an NCAA A cut pretty much in a dual meet. If she was on, she could hit an A cut. And there's also times where she could be 4 to 6 seconds and 100 off, and just because that's just how it was,
Right.
And yet that 4 to 6 seconds was still so much faster than all of her teammates and all the people around her, that again, she never had the team kind of able to kind of come up, it's okay, you can bounce back. Everyone comes up to the 125 100-yard breaststroker that just went 145, like, it's okay, you'll do better next, because it's, again, you're like, and here I think people sometimes they just assume that because you're fast, that takes care of everything, Right. So Caeleb Dressel, to our eyes, good looking guy, swimming fast, has all these endorsements, does whatever he wants to do. He's good, and we don't think about that possibility that he might not be good. And like you're saying, so maybe is it somewhere along the line where we just assume that, is it something like when you're 8 and under, 9 and you go to sleep the next day, you're faster. It's just, you woke up, you're bigger. And then all of a sudden you hit an age where all of a sudden it gets a little, and we see that all the time, 13, 14 women, that's a break point. 15, 16, that's a break point. There's these points where all of a sudden you just see these population declines. And I'm wondering if it is kind of that one size fits all, where, again, it doesn't matter the speed of the person, I guess is what I'm saying. Elite level on down, a goal is a goal, whether it's to break, 50 point or 110, doesn't matter.
Yeah. So I think I want to highlight a couple of things that you brought up, because there's some the ways that I think about it and communicate about, those sort of themes. There's themes in what you brought up. One of them is, again, you use Dressel as an example, and I think it's fruitful to use Dressel as an example because he's one of the most famous swimmers in the entire world. Right. So people are thinking about him all the time. The examples make sense to him and make sense to people because, they just have more sort of knowledge in comparison to us talking about the Division III national record holder that you coached, which only, complete nerds like me know that, right?
Yeah. So, right.
So, like when you look at like a swimmer like Dressel, and I could see, again, as somebody who had followed his swimming pretty closely, that, okay, what's his best time in the 100 free is like a 47.0, right? Mm-hmm. And then he swims at the World Championships this year, and I think he did 47 mid, basically, or he did that in the lead up, somewhere around there. I'm guessing, again, I don't know, so I want to specify everything with I don't know about Caeleb Dressel, but I'm guessing it does affect him in a similar way to any swimmer that anyone listening to this podcast has coached, or any person who's ever swam who's gone, I just went to my big meet and I swam slower than my best time. Like, you have a bad feeling about that, right? Like, there is nothing in particular you can do. There is something psychological that triggers a negative emotion with you, even though it's completely unfair, right? Even when we can recognize that it's abjectly unfair to expect yourself to just improve forever. And especially when you have essentially reached a level that's almost unparalleled in the history of the sport. It doesn't matter. You're a human being. You still expect yourself to improve. And one of the reasons behind this goes to the second point that you made. And I've written about this. Actually, I have a blog way back about this, but I think it's the process you described, whereby, you start swimming and every time you dive in the water, you go best time. And then eventually that stops happening. I just, sort of coined a term, genetic free ride, for that. Right?
That's good. So that makes sense.
Because I've seen it, you have swimmers that don't even hardly practice or do anything that a coach would sit down and say, this is what you need to do to improve, that will improve regardless. And I think this, there's a whole nother podcast we could do about how the heck do you evaluate age group coaches? Because our shorthand evaluation is hey, how much are the swimmers improving? But it's really hard to make a certain age of swimmer to have a certain age of swimmer not improve. Like it's almost
Right.
impossible because they just get bigger, they get stronger,
Yeah.
and they get more coordinated. Then there's a last sort of period where they start to get more sort of coordinated in their new adult body,
Right.
and
Right.
that's sort of, if I were to pinpoint any point as the end of genetic free ride, it would be that. And but psychologically, right, they are in this period where they may learn that what they love about swimming is that great feeling of showing up to a meet and going a best time. Because just in the same way I described with Dressel, that even though it's unfair, you will probably have a negative emotion triggered by anything short of the best performance you've ever done. The flip side of that is also true. It feels really good to go a best
Yeah.
time. Like
Right.
it
Right.
it feels awesome. And imagine your experience with the sport is, I've been doing this for 5 years, and almost every time I dive into the water, I get this great feeling, and then it just stops. Right. And you're
Right.
thinking like, you you've drawn all this. If I reference like motivational structure, you've built all this structure around it. Like to give an example, you might say, well, I'm improving a lot and I'm dropping a lot of time, and it's because I work so hard. That might be like a sort of connection you form in your mind, pretty natural connection, and you probably have a lot of people backing that up. You probably have coaches telling you that, maybe your parents are telling you that when you're a kid. And then what are you supposed to think then when you don't keep improving? Well, I must not be working hard enough. And that's where the negativity starts to really take root, because if the positive statement is true, and you really believe it, well, then the opposite, it's only fair to guess that the opposite must also be true.
I'm wondering with that then, is it like almost like a pearl? Like you've got this grain of sand, and then the coating kind of keeps going around, but the very base of that pearl is still that grain of sand. So the same thing is like that might be so if you look at like the brain, that might be all their brain is like about that positive, like I just got faster. And yet as we go on, that's still somewhere down inside your brain, kind of like in a primitive response,
Yeah.
where right, that you might not even have an idea that it's there.
Right.
And maybe, and so what you're saying is like, in a sense, it's like such a base kind of a thing that you don't even recognize. Of course you want a best time because it's been in your life all your, every time you swim, that was kind of the thing. And now it's like so far in the back. So it's not really a cognitive thing, but it's there. And therefore, when you do something, it's not like you go, boy, I wonder why I'm not feeling 100% here, because
Yeah.
it's such a down deep kind of core
Yeah.
value almost in swimming where I have to swim fast. I have to swim faster than I did
Right.
before. And I think it's interesting too, like when we talk about Caleb Dressel, like right there, like we don't know him. We don't know if this is what's going on. But just like the other people in the world are able to kind of shift what's going to motivate them, from the outside, well, you won, so you should be happy. You didn't go best. You made $1 million, therefore you should be happy. You're making this many $1 million, therefore, and again, it's like always us on the outside is in a sense feeling like, well, he's got to be happy. It's like, well, he didn't get this, or this, but he got $1 million, but
Right.
at a certain point, it's always that what you're saying is that really deep down base thing that you might not even realize is there anymore.
Yeah.
Is it kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And I don't like, I want to always be extremely careful to say what I don't know. If there's a step that can be taken um, earlier in swimmers' careers to sort of prevent that from taking root, I don't know what
Mm-hmm.
it is. I really don't know, because I can see how it happens so naturally, and um, because it happens so naturally, it's just extremely hard to subvert such a powerful process. And then you have to think about, like, why would you even want to subvert the process of feeling good about doing your best? Like, there's the implications of it. I just haven't been able to wrap my mind around. But what I do see is that another thing runs concurrently, and that is something I referenced all the way at the beginning, and I think goes to the heart of the biggest piece of this, where positive psychology comes in, that athletes learn also simultaneously to getting all this feedback that, like, you're doing great, everything's great, it's so fun to go, best time, etc. That pessimism is extremely motivating in the short term. And this was something that it took me probably a decade of thinking to realize, right? Because I think when you start talking about optimism and pessimism, the base message that everybody gets, and I run into this every time I go talk to somebody else about it, is pessimism bad, optimism good, right? Like that.
Right, right.
We always, our brain is always seeking to take complex subjects and make them simpler. And that is the grossest sort of simplification we can come up with for that stuff. But in reality, it's not, it's nowhere near that simple. And pessimism is extremely motivating. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, I don't know, Joel, like, look, I'm going to do this with you.
I actually might have an example for you. I might.
Good,
you can tell me if I'm nuts on with this.
Okay.
So I had this one swimmer. It was funny because in the end of 4 years, I kind of let the seniors have a little time at the microphone at the banquet and just say, a little thank you to their parents or whatever. And this woman's speech was like, every year that she swam, she assumed that I was going to cut her. At some point, I was going to cut her from the team or not bring her to conference. I think at the time, she had like 4 team records. She was an NCAA qualifier in 2 events. Swam on a couple All-American relays. But in her, she honestly believed she was going to get cut. And for her, and again, I might be extrapolating too far with yours, but the idea that this pessimism drove her very hard. I mean, she was first one in the water, last one to leave, did everything you asked her to do because she was afraid she was going to get cut. And again, it turned out very well from a standpoint of team records and success and speed. Just, I always thought, like, that's just not a way I want to live my life, though. Every day you're like, again, you're going to be successful, but I don't think you're ever going to appreciate that success because you're always like, I'm going to get cut tomorrow now. I just know it.
Well, it's like I said, it's motivating. And the end of that statement is, it's motivating in the short term. Well, like I said in the beginning, it's poisonous in the long term, right? Because it's not sustainable. It's like, I would gather that if she had to keep competing in swimming for another 40 years, that she would run aground fairly soon after finishing college. Like, she may have just held on for the time period she needed to hold on to, because,
or just been so ulcer ridden and like hair falling out.
Yeah, the negative side effects
right.
of that deep level of pessimism, right, which we can identify naturally, and you formulated perfectly the core statement that I see at the bottom of all pessimistic motivation, and that is some formulation of, if I don't, I won't, right? So if I don't push myself insanely hard, I won't be on the team.
Right.
And that, like, if you say that to yourself, it will get you out of bed in the morning and to practice. Like what I mean, it's super motivating in the short term, but over the long term, at some point, you are going to hate how mean you're being to yourself. Like, you only can take, any human being can only take so much, and even when it's yourself that's applying it, you're just gonna be like, enough already.
And I can think of so many examples, because there's so many times like where you have kids in your office and they're kind of on the fence. I remember listening to George Kennedy, who was at Johns Hopkins. He's like, sometimes you're the guy that has to open the door to let them out, in a sense. But I hear so many times that I can insert the same exact thing. If I don't swim, I won't have friends. If I don't, regulate my eating. If I don't do this, which would lead to some really behaviors that like were pretty scary down the line. Right. But you're right. I can think of so many of these conversations just hitting me in the head now, where it always started, if I don't do this, I won't be able to do this. And
Yeah.
again, and there's so many times that I remember rewarding that where, yeah, if you don't go to practice, you're not going to swim
Oh yeah,
fast
we do it all the time as coaches.
because
We go
it's
like,
exactly what I want.
if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
hold 29s on this set right now, how the heck do you think you're going to go
exactly,
156 in that 200? Like you need to do it
exactly.
right now, right?
Right, right, right. And then they do it, and so you're like, in my mind, that worked.
Yeah,
That's in my toolbox. I'm gonna bring that one out again later on when I need that because it is you keep on hitting the horse.
yeah. And again, like the place that I've gotten to it is right is a and then let me hopefully right after we said that now all the
Yeah,
people listening going like, oh my gosh, I did that, I'm still doing it today, like eliminating pessimism from your life is a similar goal to eliminating oxygen in your inhalations. Like you
eliminating
cannot,
jealousy, just
right?
anything that just
You
it just
cannot.
comes. Yeah,
You
yeah, right.
cannot, right? So there's no such thing as that as a goal, and situationally, pessimism is extremely warranted.
Sure, sure.
I have used this example a lot of times. Like, um, if a if my house is burning down and a fireman comes to put out the fire, I would like him to have the pessimistic thought that if he does not put out the fire,
Right,
my house will burn to the ground. That's a okay thought. That's
right,
a
right.
productive thought for a fireman to have in that situation. I usually say that like I just want a pessimistic fireman, but the truth is I'd like some optimism in my fireman too because I don't want him to
Yeah,
give up. Like,
correct.
yeah, like there's no
That
point.
one's
There's no
gone.
point in
Yeah,
doing it. Yeah, this another one gone, right? So, but I do want that core of the thought, and it's you won't be able to avoid doing some of this formulation. Um, it's just if you can build a motivational structure, I think that that doesn't just keep going to the well of pessimism and
yeah.
hammering yourself with if I don't, I won't.
Can you
Um,
take the example of like 29s are the goal? Okay, you already threw that out there. What would be obviously sometimes it might slip out like we said with the pessimism. Can you switch it, turn it to something again where it's going to be a more positive vein of like the 29s to reach your goal? How
yeah,
is it again where
I,
it's not assigning too much?
I mean, really simple. Uh, like really simple, just sort of mirror it on the other side. So like if I go 29s, then I have a better chance of going my goal.
Okay, so like
Like
they're doing, I don't know,
it's
just throw out some arbitrary set, 2050s on a minute, and they're not going quite where they want to be. Like they're starting out 30s, like, so maybe just as an example, be like, hey, imagine if you go 28s here, 8 more 50s. What do you think you can do if you can go 28s? Do you think that would be a better way to phrase it? Would that be eventually kind of getting in the same pitfall that we're talking about here?
well, I think like now we're getting into very specific situational. I think like this is where you get into the art of coaching. Like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you got to have a
Sure.
relationship where you know the person you're coaching well enough to know what exactly how to phrase it and how to put it in that situation. My guess is, however, that said, that almost everyone you coach that sort of pessimism that if you don't you won't thing comes
Right,
naturally
right.
to them. So it's
Sure.
like to me it is for the most part redundant to point that out to them. Like you're essentially you're telling them the same thing that they're already telling themselves many maybe hundreds of times over and internalizing and ruminating on after practice. Now, this all depends on also how much, I would say heavily on how invested they are. Because it's interesting, I see that the more invested the athlete gets, that the more sort of endemic the pessimism gets. So
Okay.
I've seen this now. I coach quite well. It's a different brand, and then now I'm getting into another sidebar, but it's a different brand of pessimism when you get lower on the achievement scale. It's less
Right.
of a pessimistic um, way of flogging themselves into doing things, and it's more of a pessimistic like I said with the pessimistic fireman example, more of a why even try, because it's not going to matter anyway. That is kind of a different brand of pessimism. But back to your question that you were asking, um, about the athlete. Yeah, or I think still, like, even the formulation that I gave, the difference between those two things is, if you start with the if you don't, you won't, then your visualization of everything you're doing is, um, here's my expectations for myself. And people who are high achieving, one of the things that they universally have is high expectations for themselves. Like, I've never met a high achieving person who's like,
Right.
I'm all right
Yeah.
with whatever. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever I do, it's good. Like, they're always setting really high expectations. They've got their expectation level, and then
Mm-hmm.
everything that doesn't meet their high expectation level is
Right.
below the line. It's a
Yeah.
deficit. Like,
Right.
so all they can, like, literally, they've got tunnel vision. So the top of everything they can see is their expectation. And
Mm-hmm.
then they only visualize stuff that either meets their expectation or is
Right.
below the
Right.
line. Right. And so you can imagine how those deficits can pile up in their mind. And that's when you have a really high achieving athlete who, um, is is feeling incredibly negative about themselves and when what they're capable of, and therefore extremely anxious when it
Yeah.
comes time to compete at their best. Now, if you take the other statement, the statement that I made that says, like, if I can do 29s, then I have a better chance to, or even the statement you made, if I can do 28s, right? Now you've taken the visualization, and your expectation level is here, right? And everything that comes above your expectation level is a surplus. You can't see the
Mm-hmm.
surplus if if you don't, you won't, because all you're
Right.
visualizing is your deficits. On the flip side of it, if you can see that meeting your expectations, okay, that's good. And by the way, I always tell people, like, because I think that, the people get tortured by their high expectations, and then there's
Right.
people around them going, well, maybe you shouldn't have such high expectations for yourself, because that's really what's torturing you. I think that's bullshit. Sorry, that's my one swear for the podcast.
Now we're
Like,
not getting on Disney. Yeah.
now we're
All
not
right.
getting on Disney. Hold on to that. Hold on to high expectations for yourself, but be able to visualize yourself either when you're meeting them, also focus on when you're exceeding them.
Right.
Because
Right.
think about the difference that makes when you get to that high performance moment and you're standing behind the block, and what you have accustomed in your memory is not all the times, not all your deficits, not everything that's wrong with you and all the mistakes that you made and all the reasons why you might not do well, right? Instead, you can visualize all the times you met your high expectations for yourself or even exceeded them.
Right.
And um, that is pretty powerful and can definitely influence how confident you're feeling and how untortured and sort of unworried you might feel in a moment like that.
And I'm thinking too, a couple of points here, like especially you mentioned, like I imagine, like again using like a Caleb Dressel type example, someone or the woman that I mentioned that like
Yeah.
all these team records and things like that. Her pessimism from the coach's perspective, I would just kind of laugh. I feel bad now because now I
It's
realize
not the worst reaction I can
yeah,
imagine. Totally.
in a sense, that it's like she really believed that. I just didn't think that she could honestly believe that. And so for me, it's like, I cannot believe that she would think this. I think she's just being ridiculous, and therefore I'd laugh. Versus, let's say, the typical kid you get on your age group team comes in, he's got the hat on backwards, like the logo is facing forward, the jammers there are 3 sizes too big, and their level of pessimism, whatever level of pessimism they have, right away I'd be like, it's okay, man. Hang in there. You keep doing what you're doing. Let's figure out, And so with them, I'm willing to kind of work through. Versus the elite level athlete, again, like we mentioned earlier with the woman who like could go 4 seconds slower, and people won't talk to her because it's still faster than what they can do.
Sure.
Or this elite level pessimism where it's like it seems so ridiculous to everyone else. and not being able to kind of go, geez, that's real inside of her though. It didn't
Yeah.
occur to me even not until like this moment that's real inside of her. And yet, like we said, the person walking in gets a far different treatment level and help through that mental hurdle.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of weird how in our sport, time is so dependent on everything. It's like, oh, they'll be having a great time if they swim fast. They'll get a different level of encouragement if they swim fast. It's so contextual, but also they're not going to receive the base level of, hey, you're doing a good job once they get a certain point too. We're like, dude, you're doing fine. Hang in there. It's okay.
Yeah.
You kind of save that for all the other ones with the hat on backwards and the goggles that are off askew and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very astute point. And I would gather that there's probably a lot of people that don't give somebody like Caleb Dressel a lot of empathy when he's struggling, because they go like, man, I'd kill to go 47
exactly
100 free. What's wrong with him? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what do you mean you're not enjoying it? Like that would be like the most amazing thing that ever happened in my life. Like, what are you doing? And I think two coaches have this reaction where like, well, this is like anybody. When people are experiencing a strong emotion, that part of your brain is extremely overpowering, and it's so overpowering that it will shut down the neofrontal cortex, that is the thinking part of your brain. So if someone else around you is having an emotional moment and you yourself are not experiencing it, it can be very easy to look at them and go, well, that person's being completely irrational right now. Like, why are they doing that? But we never have the second thought that's like, oh yeah, I'm also irrational every time I'm having an emotional reaction. So actually what they're doing is totally normal. And I think what I'm on a mission for, I told my wife this last night in some of the work that I do, is I started off, I was teaching optimism, right? And I thought like, okay, if I can just give people the skills to practice their optimism, I'm going to be doing a great thing in the world. And I still think that's worth doing. However, I have learned that maybe a precursor step is destigmatizing pessimism on the other end. And like, so we get uncomfortable, we can see that the other person is being unreasonable or being ridiculous in what they're saying, and we might have a reaction. Like I said, your laughing reaction is on the scale of reactions I've heard. I've seen way worse, right? I've talked with coaches that, and I probably have been guilty about this at moments too, who have started actively arguing with the athlete in that moment, because they're like, basically like, why are you being such a blockhead? And, like hurting, and they get mad in that. I think we as coaches, we have the opportunity to actually educate athletes, to teach, to show them that the sort of pessimistic thoughts they're having about themselves, that there's nothing wrong with them for having that actually makes them normal, like typical human beings. Like that is a natural thing to do. And then that can be a pivot step to, changing some of that in the future. And people often think that if you accept something about somebody else, like if somebody comes to you with that and you accept what they're telling you, that you agree with it. You don't have to agree with it, right? To be empathetic towards another person, you don't need to buy that whatever they're telling you is going on is 100% reality. You just have to accept that it's their reality.
Right on.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
just accept, like, yes, I can see that's what you're thinking, right? And because who wants to accept help from somebody who doesn't understand what you're going through? Like, if their immediate reaction is like, your reality is a lie, well, that sort of just puts a stop to any kind of forward progress on anything.
I'm wondering too, and this might be a different podcast, the idea of how we, in a sense, treat athletes after each swim. Especially, like again, that kind of that base, no matter what happens, is first thing they get a best time, they're going to see their parents, the coaches, everyone smiling, clapping, happy. And so like it becomes if I get a best time, then I get even a smile or something like that. It's a small reward, but it's a reward nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so each time that happens, I get this. But then also when you come out, and this is why I noticed, and again, you can tell me if this will be a different podcast another time. I had a really hard time turning off the but like, yeah, it was a great time, but we're really going to need to hit the third 50 on this next one. We're really going to do this. And so like they'd be seniors. This was their final swim, their last swim.
You'd be giving them advice for their next 100 free.
Well, it would always hit me where like I had to remember that, oh, by the way, there's nothing next. All you say is you did a great job, fantastic career. I'm really happy you swam here. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that took a lot to be able to kind of rewire myself to just kind of get in the moment of this is it. This is the swim. Enjoy the swim. Enjoy the race. And it was hard to do that as a coach. I'm assuming it's hard to do as a swimmer too, because your whole life, first you get the little reward. Now, if you're not getting that best time and right away everyone's not smiling, then you're like, okay, well, what did I do wrong? And all of a sudden, here's the list, the laundry list that you need to kind of correct next time. And I wonder if, again, that kind of trains that pessimism to be more the negative pessimism that you're talking about. Is that more another podcast, or does that kind of tie in a little bit?
I think we could do a whole podcast on post-race conversations.
Yeah. Okay.
When you say it, because as I said, I've been 15 years in the lab, and when I say in the lab, my own brain, sitting around obsessing, thinking about this stuff, and I'm reminded of it because I just recently had a phone conversation that I told you guys about with Ryan Wachenberg, who I worked with at University of Houston, is now at Auburn University. And probably one of the most valuable things to me in anything that I do is, when people tell me like, oh, and remember when you did this, and like that made such a huge difference, and I'm thinking like any coach that's listening to this can relate to this. You go, I don't remember doing that.
Right? I know exactly what like, you mean. Exactly.
I don't remember doing that. And he had, I spent an entire college invite where I said, I'm going to come. I'm not going to watch any of the swimming that everybody does. I'm going to stand next to you, and all I'm going to do is observe the conversation, the post-race conversation, the 3-day meet, and under big pressure. And we had some takeaways from that apparently are still going to this day with him. And he has felt like there's some really, really successful stuff with that. So maybe
I think that's a good tease for the next podcast. Right? Then there we go. So we're going to lead into that. Maybe a little guest appearance would be good. Maybe to tie up this one, then what would be something again? Maybe again, where I'm saying it's not a retro design. That like this occurred, therefore this swimmer implodes. What I'm saying is just how can we backcast him to like try to help the person a little bit more through it? Would you like kind of the Carol Dweck book of when you're giving any kind of praise or reward or something like that, address something behind it. So rather than the best time, so especially like an 8 and under best time, obviously it could have been they got bigger. It could have been they had the right amount of like, candy to, fruit snack relationship where they were just on the right high to hit that swim. Maybe there's enough kids cheering, or maybe there's improvement. Maybe we need to make sure that we isolate, like, that swim came from, you working really hard and doing a great job this week. Is there something like that we could kind of, as the one takeaway from this podcast, you just fast forward to the end. Is there something that you can make it where it's like a specific thing that you're trying to reward that doesn't all of a sudden become that time bomb ticking later on down the line?
I mean, a great question. And maybe just get a hold of your mic for a second, because you got a little bit of scraping back and forth. And I know I'm going to get feedback later. I'm going to get feedback later. But so you unopened a can of worms with the Carol Dweck reference, because I think, one of the challenges of doing anything like this is that if you popularize anything, everything, like you and I are both you're going to get this example because you and I are both Milton Elms people. So if you popularize anything, any kind of
posture line balance,
any kind of solution you come up with has second order problems, and then it has third order problems, and it has fourth order problems. And so part of another thing that I've spent all this time obsessing about is not only some of these interventions, but then, what do you do about the second order problem that comes? And then what do you do about the third order? And I would say with the Dweck stuff, it goes back to the example I used earlier. So that people got into doing that process praise, right? They got into I'm not going to just tell somebody great swim. I'm going to explain to them why it was a great swim. And maybe my explanations are going to be you worked on your turn so hard in practice and it really paid off for you, right? Or whatever.
Sure.
Because I want to I want to make that mental connection. At the same time, the second order problem you get with that is then what conclusion should somebody draw when they don't do well? Well, they might take all the stuff that you have been praising them for doing and assume that they have not done it that time.
Gotcha.
Right. And that's probably not true. It probably is true that the difference between a good performance and a bad performance is that you did, in the bad performance, you might have done 4 out of the 10 things you would have helped you do it. And in a good performance, you did 6 out of the 10 things. Right.
Yeah.
But your mind goes, when you do well, 10 out of 10, I did 10 out of 10. And when you do well, it goes 0 out of 10 because it needs to take that complexity and simplify it because it's lazy and it thinks. So I guess I would say a better intervention is to have long-term strategies for educating people about the negativity that they're going to encounter no matter what, right? Because that subverts the whole, what I just described, that second order of everything, right? Educating people about that so that they have a way of communicating about it. They have a language for sharing it, and you destigmatize it in that way, and then you have an opportunity down the line to teach them a different path.
Okay,
to go.
That's good. I get it.
All right. Thanks, Joel. Thanks for recording this. Thank you to everybody who's listening. Again, Chris D _coach on Instagram if you want to follow that as well and get more content like this. And we'll be back, I think, next week with a more regular pod with Eric. And maybe for the YouTube viewers, we'll have sorted out some stuff to get better video quality on here. We're gonna get our consultant Lori Rawlings back on the case for sorting out that one. You got some questions to go forward to the woman upstairs, Joel.
That's going next level sarcasm too. And again, it's just the beatdown of, again, lack of understanding of how anything outside the swimming world works. I get highlighted right then and there. Can't do this. Can't do this. Yeah.
Good luck with that. And I'll talk to you guys all again next week. Bye.
All right. Thanks. See you.